and he who has the gold and the commodities makes the rules, and all of the metal is heading eastward. So whether we beat them to the punch and kind of steal their thunder, which wouldn't surprise me, or they do it by this time next year, wouldn't surprise me one iota if we saw gold revalued to a level that would shock people. And I mean, there are signs all over the place. You know, the Fed drops short-term interest rates down, but at the same time, we see the back end of the curve start to go up. And that to me is the market, or big money selling long-dated claims for the future delivery of dollars, which increases interest rates to the bonds. And this is not a good omen. This is at the same time, we see them buying gold and silver at a rate the world has never seen before. And I think that for a long time, we had, it seemed, this geopolitical cooperation, in particular in the price of oil and the price of gold, with the Saudis and with other countries. And it seems as though the markets are no longer discounting this geopolitical cooperation, at least in my mind, in terms of the price of oil and in terms of gold. And they are starting to separate themselves. We can look at a country like, for example, in this case, a country like Poland, who has now decided to continue to purchase gold. They're already at 420 metric tons. They have more gold now than the EU. And when you talk about what Adam Lipinski, the head of the central bank, said, is that he wants to get it up to as high as 20% of their foreign exchange reserves. And I want to remind people what Adam Lipinski said when asked recently, why is it that you buy gold? And he says, because gold will retain its value even when someone cuts off the power to the global financial system, destroying traditional assets based on electronic accounting records. Now, of course, we don't assume that this will happen, but as the saying goes, forewarned is forearmed. When you hear things like this, it becomes very, very important. We're seeing the breakout of gold in Swiss francs, which is a very important confirmation. Because especially in terms of other currencies, where we've seen gold break out in most currencies, but the Swiss franc has been one of the world's top performing currencies this year and in years past. And a breakout in Swiss francs above moving averages is even more, monumentous. And it is, and it's happening. We're seeing countries like Iran, who have increased their gold ownership and purchasing by 6 times this year compared to the same time. We're seeing a shift away. We're seeing a movement away from the West, a shift away from treasuries, a shift away from dollars, and a changing of the guard. And, countries are tired of sanctions and the bullying, and they're trying to get out of the way of the West. And they're doing that by purchasing over $1 trillion of gold since 2022, while selling $1 trillion in treasuries. This is a trend that is unmistakable. When we talk about the countries in Project Enbridge, the ones that are moving to what I believe is really the big moment, and that is if indeed we see a common settlement currency come out of this meeting in October or in a few weeks here in Russia. It's noteworthy to note that all of the countries in Enbridge, China, Hong Kong, Thailand, UAE, they all run a current budget surplus, and all of them have been increasing their gold reserves. And instead of buying treasuries, this is what's called gold recycling, and they're storing their trade surpluses in gold instead of U.S. treasuries. This is huge. All of these things are going to factor in to this big moment. And it's also noteworthy to note that China, Hong Kong, and the UAE all have sophisticated precious metals markets. The one in Shanghai, the volume has now surpassed the COMEX dramatically, with a 400% increase in volume over the past 6 months or less. It's now the second most actively traded market in the world. You can see the pieces are being put into place. It's not just gold. We find out that Russia's federal budget draft includes plans to acquire not just gold, platinum, and palladium, but for the first time ever announced by a central bank, silver. And it's the first time that the central bank has ever made a significant announcement in this regards. And, could it push it above 50? Yeah, why not? When you have stupidity to the degree that we have, suppression on the COMEX market, on the LBMA, yeah, it's rocket fuel. And maybe that's why we see the Citibank analyst, Max Layton, come out and say that, first of all, silver's up about 35% so far this year, but they're predicting over the next 3 months a rise up to $38 and maybe even higher. So all of these things are beginning to factor into into the global picture, and that discounts all the stupidity that we are seeing at home. And then you have the reporting agencies. Remember, we talked about Claudia Sahm, the Sahm rule, which is I think 9 recessions in a row perfect record, where if employment rate drops, I think 50 basis points below its 3-month moving average, you're in a recession. And the unemployment rate would have had to fall to 4.5% for that to be triggered, as it should be. In September, we get this again, with the BLS. I mean, we should just take the L right out of this and call it what it is. It's BS. They tell us after, revising 1 million jobs in last year, now they tell us that in September, that they added a whopping 254,000 jobs, the biggest monthly increase since March, higher than average monthly gain, blah, 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 blah. But what they didn't tell us is that they actually increased the number of government workers by 785,000 government workers, the highest monthly surge in government workers on record. Right before an election, complete and total BS out of the BLS. In reality, the U.S. job market shed 458,000 jobs in September. They're called non-seasonally adjusted jobs. Okay, so those would be the kids who went back to college that were, doing landscape work and part-time work and whatever. We lost 460,000 jobs. We added 785,000 government jobs. And to your point, government doesn't produce anything. They just suck assets out of the system, suck profitability. They don't have the profit motive that we find in business, where you do things for a profit motive. There is no profit motive with government. Therefore, it's completely and totally inefficient. And that's exactly what we are seeing here, just this crap and people will believe it. Because most of the people who think that the economy is strong didn't even see that they quietly revised jobs down at the end of the year for 2023. It's disgusting. We spent $66 billion on illegal immigrants in 2023 versus $4 billion for homeless veterans. When you talk about, priorities being misplaced, and it's crazy. So, I think that there are a lot of things going on right now that people should be alarmed about. I was talking with my dad the other day. He said, I don't think there'll be gold confiscation. They'll just make gold so expensive that no one can afford to buy it. And this is the gold revaluation. And I want to, I've read this before, but I want to read it one last time before we sign off. I read to you what Adam Glupinski said, but I think it's really important to go back to, sometimes the further back we go, the more clear things become. And if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat its mistakes. And we talk about going all the way back to, and I may have read this on your show before, but for those who didn't hear it, it's worth repeating one more time as we sign off. And this was a conversation, between a man named Thomas Enders and what's his name? Kissinger. And it was a meeting that they had, and this was from the Freedom of Information Act, meeting they had in 1974. And it goes like this. Mr. Enders says to Kissinger, it is against our interest to have gold in the system because for it to remain, and it would result in it being revalued periodically. And although we still have some substantial gold holdings, a larger part of the official gold in the world is concentrated in Western Europe. This gives them the dominant position in world reserves and the dominant means of creating reserves. We've been trying to get away from that into a system which we can control. And Kissinger says, but that's a balance of payments problem. And Mr. Ender says, yes, but it's a question of who has the most leverage internationally. If they have the reserve creating instrument by having the largest amount of gold and the ability to change its price periodically, they have a position relative to ours of considerable power. They're going to revalue the price of gold. I believe that in my soul. And when you see the central banks of the world, who are the most well-informed traders on the planet, not only wickedly accumulated at a level that is increasing year over year, month over month, day over day, hiding how much they're really truly accumulating, and then speaking continuously of gold being held in the revaluation account and the prospect of indeed revaluing it, it will happen. I do believe that. And they will use it to reliquify the system, which will create massive inflation. But it is something that I think that they will do. It is a way of maybe option 3. Instead of defaulting, instead of outright hyperinflating in your face, they'll revalue gold, which will create massive inflation, but will enable them to pay off a large portion of the debt. And I think that's what we are seeing. And I think you go back to 1974 after we were off the gold standard already. So they're calling it a reserve creating instrument. Gold is eternal. They understand this. The big money understands it. And he who has the gold and the commodities makes the rules. And all of the metal is heading eastward. So whether we beat them to the punch and kind of steal their thunder, which wouldn't surprise me, or they do it, I would say by... And I don't want to go out on a limb, but I will and say, by this time next year, wouldn't surprise me one iota if we saw gold revalued to a level that would shock people. And it's an option that's staring them right in the face, and I think it's hard to ignore. So I'm not one for making predictions like this, but I think it's just too much is happening that is leading this way for it not to be understood that the narrative is being rewritten right in front of us on gold. And now with Russia coming out and saying silver too, and China buying up all the concentrate and the doré all around the world, gold and silver have never been more important. And I hope people are taking these weekly calls we have with a dose of seriousness, because I think this is it. I really do. Getting gold will not be as easy as it once was before this is all said and done, and the price will be much higher as a result of the world understanding that by revaluing it, much of their problems can be washed away. And I think they already noticed that.